And there's a lot of downstream impacts on your GI tract. So it drives inflammation in the intestinal tract in a couple of different ways. So when you can't make enough of a hydrochloric acid in the stomach and you can't get that pH down between 1.5 to 3, if you're hanging out just above 3, now that acid and the pH coming out of the stomach into that first part of the intestine isn't low enough to actually trigger more biochemical things to happen. There's the domino effect and downstream impacts. This is one of them. When the stomach contents come out, if you're digesting well, those acidic contents are really acidic, like pH 1.5 to 3, somewhere in there. That's really, like, do you remember grade 8 biochemistry? Like, don't put your finger in that solution. It's really acidic. Yeah, you don't want to put your finger in this solution. It's really acidic. You do not want this acidity to go through your intestinal tract because you're going to burn holes through your whole intestinal tract if you're going to sit at that pH. Oh, but don't worry. Because in a well-functioning body, when you have a pH of 1.5 to 3 coming out of the stomach, that now triggers your pancreas to release something called bicarbonate. What's bicarbonate? Baking soda. Do you remember baking soda from grade 8 biochemistry? It's on the basic side of the pH, which means it's a higher pH. So what happens when you add a higher pH to a low pH solution? You will bring the pH back up. So in the scenario of somebody who's doing well and the digestion is complete and you have enough hydrochloric acid, that low pH, as it comes out of the stomach, triggers the pancreas to release bicarbonate. What does bicarbonate do? It raises the pH of the food coming out of the stomach. And now that stuff coming out of your stomach is no longer acidic. It's now set at the right pH level to go down the digestive tract and trigger more digestive enzymes, to trigger your gallbladder to release bile, lots of other compounds, your intestinal tract to make different enzymes and release different enzymes. And if it's at the right pH as it comes out of the stomach, that supports reduction of inflammation in your intestinal tract, in the cells, and supports a really healthy mucosal lining. Why this is important: your intestinal lining is 3 layers thick. You have the intestinal lining, the cells, you have the mucosal barrier, and you have your microbiome that lives in that mucosal barrier. For somebody who's digesting well and bicarbonate is released and the stomach contents come out, whoop, pH goes back up. Now that's going to support healthy intestinal lining, healthy mucosal production, which further helps protect from, if ever, God forbid, there's a little bit of acidity coming out and you can't quite get the pH back up. But in that mucosal lining lives your microbiome. Now, for someone who can't quite get the pH down to 3, your pH is sitting above 3, somewhere in there, comes out of the stomach, and 3.2 is not enough to trigger your pancreas to release bicarbonate. Oh. Well, bicarbonate is going to bump your food pH to, like, I'm going to guess here. I actually couldn't find the number on this, but it's going to bump it up to, for example, 4. So, or 5, somewhere in there. So it's not quite neutral. It's a little bit less than neutral, but it's certainly not what acid was coming out of your stomach. So pH higher up is not acidic enough to cause irritation to the intestinal lining. However, if your pH is 3.2, 3.2 coming out of the stomach was not enough to trigger the release of bicarbonate. So now your pH is 3.2 instead of being bumped up to 4.5 or 5. So now you're really acidic going through the intestinal tract, more acidic than it was supposed to be. Not enough to trigger certain things. So oops, now you actually have acidic compound, like the acidic food making its way through your intestinal tract. That contributes to irritation and inflammation in that first layer of your cells. It compromises your system's ability to make that mucosal barrier. And now the pH is shifted in your gut. And when you shift that pH, the microbiome that lives on top of it alters. Different bacteria, part of that microbial picture you have in your gut, different bacteria thrive at different pHs. If you have a more acidic pH in your intestinal tract, you will favor the strains of bacteria that prefer to live in that acidic environment. They are not the ones that are health promoting necessarily. Yeah. Whoops. So in this whole scenario of not making enough acid, you end up not being able to close the lid to the stomach. So now you have reflux, but now you're impacting everything down the digestive tract. That's what's happening. And that is part of the downstream impacts that are so negative when it comes to acid reflux. So it's one of those contributors to inflammation in the gut. It's another contributor to your microbiome. And further to this, when you start to gum up those works, now you're adding to your liver's to-do work, because she's the one who deals with the cleanup. She's the one who deals with the breaking down of inflammation. And inflammation is not necessarily bad. Inflammation is your body's repair response. But the more you turn on the repair response, the more repair you have to do. The more repair you have to do, the more you have to clean up from doing the repair. That falls to the liver. And now it's a really heavy load on your liver.